I think that the industry in its totality, wine and spirits, has been so long and for so many years been a boys' club, that this idea of breaking through as a female, whether it's in the executive space or whether it's in the winemaking space, wherever that leads, is intriguing to people because they're like, how did you do it in the wake of all of this machismo that surrounds you every day? And the fact of the matter is that still is true, even though you're seeing more women in more top roles within the wine and spirits industry. We're still far dominated by men.
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today about to have a conversation with Tracey Mason, the Senior Vice President of Vintage Wine Estates. Introductions in just a moment. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify. Wherever you hang out for podcasting, we are there. Hey, where can you find the best gifts at great low prices that everyone will love? At Total Wine and More, of course. With so many great bottles to choose from, find something for everyone on your list, whether it's a Cabernet for sis, sparkling wine for a coworker, or a single-barrel bourbon for dad. And if you need any help, just ask one of our friendly guides for advice. With the lowest prices in over 30 years, you'll always find what we love and what you love at Total Wine and More. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly. B21. I don't know what that means, B21. Like, just B21. I mean,
I think that you need to be 21 years or older to purchase.
well, I suppose that would be it. Then welcome to the show, Tracey. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
I had this interview with, and I want to address this because I was talking about Amelia Nardi and her plight in Italian wine, a very patriarchal society as Europe has been, and Italy and France. And she has forged her own way. And I get this sense from your career and your history, what you've done in this industry. And I had this interview with Elizabeth at Cornell Winery up on the Atlas Peak, and she said something very intelligent. She said, this should not be part of the conversation. I'm a winemaker, end of story. Why are we looking at any gender? What has been your career path with this issue in our industry?
Well, I mean, I think I share her feelings of why we're even bringing gender up at this point, especially in the winemaking side, because there's so many fantastic female winemakers. At the end of the day, it's like, are you a great winemaker or aren't you? I think that the industry, in its totality, wine and spirits, has been so long and for so many years been a boys' club, that this idea of breaking through as a female, whether it's in the executive space or whether it's in the winemaking space, wherever that leads, is intriguing to people because they're like, how did you do it in the wake of all of this machismo that surrounds you every day? And the fact of the matter is that still is true. And even though you're seeing more women in more top roles within the wine and spirits industry, we're still far dominated by men. And it's not as though that's our user case. In other words, it's not as though men drink more than women. And so it's an interesting paradigm to kind of look at, to say, well, women make up probably 60% of wine drinkers. They make more than 90% of decisions when shopping. But yet we're still surprised, oh my God, that a woman's risen to any level of respect in our industry.
There's been movement. I think your own Jessica told me, and it's not enough, of course, but it seems like there's awareness. And I can't tell, maybe you can shed some light on this, if it's that the barriers are being, softened, or it's more perseverance on the part of people of color as well, to get into this, or the sort of predetermined intimidation factor that comes with our industry that people just don't see a way in, which is a combination of all those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly likely it's a combination of all those things. I certainly can't speak to what it's like to be a person of color. I can speak to what it's like to be a minority from an LGBT
I have a problem with that.
point of view. But what I can say is that women are still in the minority. And I don't mean in the minority when we're talking about brand management or in marketing, but certainly massively still in the minority in sales, massively still in the minority in executively held positions. And, we have a long, long way to go. And so one of the missions that I have and my predecessor, Terry Wheatley, had is to continually rise, help women rise, give them the visibility, give them the spotlight so that their efforts, which come naturally highlighted seemingly for men, we need an extra boost, I think, from women within us.
Have a listen to a show I just recorded up in Montalcino, Italy, with Emilia Nardi of the Silvio Nardi winery up there. It's an incredible conversation, private tour, lunch, the whole thing. It's about women in wine in that part of the world. Very interesting conversation. Do you think it's a relief then when women get into this industry and they feel this, lack of headwinds? I just sent off a young intern here whose job it was during her internship to write talking points for the podcast. At that time, we had gone through many women in studio. And she got so inspired, she applied to the Cornell University's enology program. She got accepted. And I feel very proud of that. I feel like I had something to do with something, even though her parents have a little vineyard in their home. But I just thought she felt something. She saw something. She heard something that inspired her to do this. Is there relief in that when you see young women trying to get into this and that the paths are a little smoother than they were maybe when you started doing it?
I think relief might be a strong word. I think there's encouragement that more women are entering the field, more women are getting noticed. But, until we have a step change in executive leadership, across the broad spectrum of our big alcohol and wine companies in the U.S., you're never going to see a major shift in that. Women make up more than the percentage of wine drinkers. They make up more than the percentage of household income. They make up more than the percentage of shopping decisions. Yet, if you look at the broad spectrum of boards and who's in charge of everything, we're very seldom in that conversation, and that needs to change.
I was reflecting as I was writing some of these points, and my mother, who was a very strong woman, passed away a few years ago. First councilwoman in our town in Palos Verdes here in the South Bay. And she told me once, and I thought it was very interesting, because my grandfather came to America, selling watermelons on the boat, escaping the genocide in Armenia. And he gave his company, which was the largest carpet store in Hollywood, Los Angeles, I think west of the Mississippi, actually, in the 40s. And it failed miserably when my uncles took it over. And he told her once, "I wish you were a man." And what he meant by that was she had the drive and the gumption and the smarts and the business sense to run the company. But at that era of Hollywood, 1950, let's say 1955, you just didn't do it. And it just hit me when I was writing these notes that had happened. But Jessica was telling me that now there's 25% winemakers are women coming out of school, but the executive ranks are still sort of shy. Is it the same in the cannabis business? I know you're in that sector as well, or is that so new that there's just it doesn't exist?
Well, I think there's a lot of press that initially went out about the cannabis industry being so female, that comparative to standard CPG, female leaders were at the forefront. I think at a time for at least a blip in the radar, we were about at 35 to 37% of C-suite or above positions within cannabis. Mm-hmm. That has since changed, number one, but also it hasn't necessarily translated across what I would call as our MSOs, our multi-state operators. And more importantly, even though women held comparatively to other industries a larger percentage of C-suite seats, we received a fraction of the funding.
Really?
So with women, while we were heading up companies, the companies that were headed by men were getting all the money. So it was something crazy like 37% of women were heading up these companies, but only something like 7% of funding was going to those companies. So it's still like that, kind of bravado that men bring to the table, and men feel more comfortable seemingly with other men as leaders. So I think it's tragic what happened there. And I was a victim of it myself, having had my own cannabis company. That it is, just a function of the world in which we operate across multiple business verticals.
That's a interesting statistic, a fascinating statistic, because it's calculatable, it's there, it's live, it's real. You can't play with that statistic, that the funding just wasn't available. And I would be interested to go back and see those applications and see what the reasons were. Like, can't be skill sets. I mean, how could they say that, right? They have to come up with some other reason as to why these applications were denied somewhere, and the money went somewhere else. That's crazy. I think
it's hard to say. I mean, I honestly can't answer to it. I just know experientially and statistically that what I say is true.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The other movement too, that's been on the show as well, is the LGBTQ community moving into the wine space. Vincent Morrow at the Press won the Sommelier of the Year, and I'm wondering, as part of this, as these needles move, which is great and fascinating and necessary to do, that they're still merit based. I'm not saying that they're not. I wanted your opinion as, like, are we highlighting this, or are we just finding the real successful people in these communities that are contributing to what we do every day?
I think that, I think that's a really good question. And how I would answer that is that, yes, it's certainly finding the best people that are doing the best work in whatever it is that we're doing. And then their sexual orientation or their ethnicity is part of what makes that person, but it doesn't necessarily define what makes them great at their job. And so specifically for, my own experience as a lesbian in the wine and spirits industry since I was, quite young, there was an element of positivity because men would speak very freely in front of me because I thought that they were on the same page with them. Which is a very interesting thing.
That's fascinating.
So it's almost like you get like this insider look at how men speak with one another. But it's also been something that I've never hidden it, because I felt like it is who I am. Like, I don't ask intimate details about you and your wife. But the other side of it is too, which is more something I've talked about in the past, but it's an interesting, I think, psychological point of view. When I say to you, Paul, like, let's talk about your wife or your girlfriend or whomever, I'm not imagining you in any kind of intimate situation with your wife. But when women talk about being gay and with other women, oftentimes the first place that men go, especially, is imagining that situation.
Wow.
So it's a very, and that's, like, again, statistically proven. It's just, it's a natural. So it's a very different thing when I'm talking to my colleagues at work about their husbands or wives. It's a very different lens through which they're viewing my relationship, at least at first, and then that slowly becomes, oh, they have to deal with kids and dogs and all the other shit that we have to deal with,
That is, I don't know, I can't use the word fascinating anymore. I've used it too many times, but so interesting. And it's true. It's true. It's interesting too. You get a locker room look at conversation with men because of your sexual orientation. And that's totally true. I could totally see that. Oh, yeah, they're disarmed this way, and we can say what we want because, hey, she's one of us, kind of thing, right? So, and then though, their imaginations in a situation or a social situation or a business situation that shouldn't be happening, kind of takes off with them. That's amazing, and that's true. You would never ask me about my wife and I.
And nor would I picture it. Like, I don't
No.
need to. It's just like, that's your life and I don't care. I mean, I care that you're happy and she's happy, but so it's a different environment in which to negotiate. It's a different sort of but once you get past it, and you do get past it, is when you can really start recognizing the freedom of just, okay, this is who I am. I'm authentically myself, and now I'm going to lead from that place of authenticity. And then, I've gotten feedback that I suck at politics, and I do. So, I'm sure that
that's a good thing.
I'd be a CEO of something right now if I was better at politicking, and it's just not who I am. I try to lead from a place of authenticity and some level of accountability to the success of me and my team as a singular unit.
I think authenticity is the most important and valuable lesson to have, or persona to have in business. I can't see it in any other way. I think people see through everything else, and that you can be trusted, despite their imagination, to do what you say you're going to do and to produce what you say you're going to produce, because you're not pulling any punches.
Well, and you also have to do it. That's the thing.
Right.
I mean, I've had people that have worked for me that said all the right words, right? Used all the right phrases, but could not actually execute anything. So I'd rather you not have the right words, but still be able to execute than, have all wax poetically about your strategy and honestly not know how to actually execute it.
Do that all the time, but I don't have to deal with it anymore because you said something important, and I saw the picture of your family, and you mentioned it last time we spoke that you have a young Cambodian girl, though they're not kids. That doesn't look like anymore.
He's Ethiopian, not Cambodian. Ethiopian and Guatemala.
Ethiopian. Oh, yeah, and they seem to be young adults now at this point.
15 and 17, they think they're young adults.
Oh, you got problems, girl.
Amen, brother. I know.
Wow. But you said something once, and that was interesting to me, because that does add a layer of complexity to your background that maybe not with some overt character, but some sort of subliminal character that you bring to the table that makes your experience and background more interesting and maybe more compatible with some of the situations you are confronted with in business, because they're all vary. And I thought that was an interesting comment. And how has that been to raising an Ethiopian girl and, what did you say? Guatemalan son? Is that right?
I think what it does is it gives you insight. Obviously I'm so American looking, it's terrifying, right? I'm blonde hair, blue eyed, the whole jam. Like, my wife is Iranian, my daughter is Ethiopian, and my son is Guatemalan. And so, coming from a background, raised in New York with 3 blonde-haired, blue-eyed sisters, three of us, 2 in general. It's a very different perspective that I've learned. Being gay, having a family full of non-white humans to whom I'm accountable, and I want the world to be accountable, has really given me a tremendous amount of perspective. And I think as we age, all of us age, and we become better leaders and become better family members and better parents, perspective is ultimately what we all need, is to really try and develop that level of empathy and understanding of people who don't look like us. And I think that's a really important lesson, and it's been a gift for me to be part of this diverse family unit, that is so beautiful. I mean, it's such a beautiful family unit, and there's so much love and come from a very different point of view as if I married the captain of the football team and we had our 2.1 kids, it's very different.
That's totally different. But wow, that conversation that you had with your wife to decide to do this, to find a young Black woman and a Guatemalan man or boy to adopt. And was there headwinds when? And we're not even on wine yet, by the way, so this is kind of interesting. But were there any headwinds to that process because of your sexuality?
Well, in full disclosure, I mean, my wife adopted the kids as infants before life, so I'm the stepmom, although a very, very engaged stepmom.
Right.
But I think she would say that, I mean, it wasn't like she disclosed that she was gay, because that would have been problematic. Instead, she she presented herself as a affluent single woman, looking to have the child. So it was never positioned as this child is going to be raised in a two female household. I don't know if that would still be the case now, because this was, again, I mean, they're 15 and 17. This is quite a while ago. But I believe now that Ethiopian adoptions are not allowed anymore, international. I don't believe that they're allowed anymore. And Guatemalan adoptions remain closed adoptions. So it wasn't by any means an easy process for my wife to go through. But I think we're all glad that she did, because now we have this incredible family unit to build on as we get older.
Our friends, and I love this guy. I think he's in his 20s now, but they adopted a child from Armenia, or my background, and my wife's best friend growing up lives in Michigan, and she did the same. And I can't help but ask the question and I love this guy. He's actually quite adept at influencer marketing, and actually ran a little agency on his own. How they might feel their life would have turned out, or how different it is to be here, and if they even understand that there would have been a difference. Does that conversation ever occur, or it's just completely normal?
Absolutely. I mean, with my wife, it was important for her to make sure, and again, because she is Iranian, so she came here when she was 8 in the height of the revolution. So she clearly, sits on both continents, if you will, and, we have Thanksgiving coming up in a couple of days. And I always joke that it's my big fat Iranian Thanksgiving, because I have like 1,000 Iranians coming to my house to eat turkey. But as it relates to our kids, it was important for her to bring them back to where they're from when they turned 10. That was her commitment.
Wow.
So with Iman, who's Ethiopian, I mean, they went literally back to her village and met her family. And with our son Kian, she did take him back to Guatemala. And while he didn't meet his family because of the closed adoption status, he got to see sort of what he looks like and where he comes from. And so, I think that's really important. And, funnily enough, Shireen has been to Ireland with me, and it embraces it, like it's her own culture. So I just think, we have a mass respect for all of that. And I think it's really important to lay that foundation for kids. Not that this has anything to do with wine, but...
Well, we're going to get that right now, but I have to say one thing, because I stuck my tongue out. I didn't want you to misinterpret that, because I imagined the food, because my mother-in-law is from Iran, and my wife grew up with Persian Armenian food, and I grew up with Turkish Armenian food. They're a world apart, and I can't stand I don't know what it is. There's some bitterness. There's pomegranate soup. They make this spinach and egg dish that's literally black from being burned, and they think it's delicious. And so when you said that you have all these Iranians at your house at Thanksgiving, and I thought, oh my God, I could just see the food. It's not attractive food, right? I mean, I'm sorry, Persian food's not very good looking.
It is fun. I mean, I make the food.
So okay, the Persian food or the
no, it's a distinctly American.
Oh, okay, good.
Thanksgiving. However, there is one rice dish that I will not even try to pronounce, and I will bastardize it, but it is a Persian rice with herbs, and it's delicious. And I don't make that. I don't make rice in general. It's just not my jam. But
lima beans in it. It's got all greens.
No,
lots of dill. Like total herbed out completely.
It's something like polo sabadi, or I'm going to screw that. My wife will kill me if I.
Farsi's really good, yeah.
So our cousin brings that part, but that's the only part. Yeah.
Let's talk about some wine. I just noticed online you were the keynote speaker at a brand, and so I want to talk about branding a little bit and the wine business now. We're going through a lot of changes. The consumerism's kind of whack right now. No one really understands. I had a podcast with Rupert Symington of the famed Graham's Wares and Dallas Porthouse. And, this is one of the leading families in the wine. And he's like, we don't know what's going to happen in 2024. We're off 20%, but we can't even project what we think is going to happen. So tell me what your keynote speech was about. What were you trying to impress upon your audience?
Well, and my keynote speech on Monday was about how to leverage partnerships to create an omni-channel opportunity and cross-functional success. So when I started at VWE, many of the functions were extremely siloed. They had their own budgets, they had their own point of view. And, I really strived to break that down and really say, we have one voice as a brand, and how are we across e-com, across wine club, across DTC, across wholesale, how are we bringing that voice to life? And I was speaking specifically about partnerships that we have with other entities like QVC and Paramount Pictures, that we develop these products for them, and yet prior to my coming on board had just been in one specific channel. And now I'm saying, let's expand that reach to all of our consumer facing platforms. But really at the end of the day, so I talked about that, but at the end of the day, it was really about how to use that opportunity as a leader to bring a cross-functional team together toward the same goal. And in my view, as leaders, that's our role, is to engage all the functions to whom we touch every day and make them feel as they're part of the larger picture, not just I'm ordering glass right now, or I'm setting up an e-com email. This is about we are collectively trying to rise and collectively trying to create brand awareness and brand affinity.
That's not easy to do. Branding, as you know, is sometimes seems magical, and sometimes, like for instance, Dow selling for $1 billion or $900 million. You think about, wow, wasn't that old? And how did that brand get built so reliably and with such a consumer confidence that it could command such a sale price? And
I'm struggling with how you ever show return on shareholder value with that type of multiple. Now I understand larger companies acquiring smaller companies and the utilization of assets and all of those things, but I'd be curious to see what their plan is to grow it. Mm-hmm. Like, you can value engineer the hell out of a brand when you buy it. You can sell off vineyards, you can consolidate bottling, you can do all of these things to value engineer what you've purchased and pull costs out of it and increase your margins. But ultimately, that only lasts for so long, and then you got to start growing the thing, right? Or then you really have to start doing something with it. And I've yet to see an acquisition, and I'm curious to know your point of view, but I've yet to see an acquisition of that size or stature in our industry that's actually resulted in an increase of overall penetration or an increase in margin, because I've not seen it. Now, not purview to every conversation that ever happens in the industry, clearly, but I've not seen it. I haven't seen it, reflected in stock price or anything like that.
It's hard to say whether you've seen it, because our industry is different than any other industry, with all the layers of licensing and the fact that there is no loyalty on the supplier side to the distributor side. And so, to bring on a brand like Dow, you have to think that Treasury is trying to just grab their part of the market share of the Paso Robles district, and maybe expand their marketing channels, but because those are established. But that's a slow grind at best, with all kinds of obstacles, because eventually, maybe RNDC says, we don't want it anymore. In fact, when Wagner left RNDC, they were thrilled. They're like so happy, because they're like, we've been busting our butt trying to make this thing work, and we're under so much pressure from the supplier to do this that it's no longer worth it for us to do that. And that you change distributors like that from a supplier, you're not going to have the same traction the first week you started with Southern or wherever you went, and then you got a merger with Wine Warehouse and that, I forgot the name of the beverage group or what it was. That stuff takes time to settle down and get the messaging into the new pipeline. It has to be a setback no matter what you do. And in San Antonio, just the Stella Rosa group, they just signed with RNDC. Actually, that's a good question for you. I was going to flip it back. I was trying to figure out, if you are a supplier like San Antonio Winery or anybody like that, then you've got your sales force, because they're all direct. They had their own sales force, their own sales managers, all the VPs. They went out in the field and they sold directly into the stores and the restaurants. But now RNDC, I guess, supplies that horsepower, right? So they have those 200 reps or whatever it is on the streets. Do you still have your own reps? Does Vintage have its own people on the street supporting the brands that the distributors are carrying?
Yes, absolutely.
And that's critical.
I mean, most of our sales group functions as people who manage distributors. In other words, they manage. But there are certain regions where having feet on the street, like, for example, we're looking for someone in Northern California, because, we have all of these estates in Napa and Sonoma that need some person walking in carrying a bag, because without the competition of the 3 million other suppliers that Southern would have. That's not to say that Southern's not doing a great job. It's just to say that everyone needs a little boost to have someone, directly involved in the business, that can call on chains, that can call on, regional chains, that can call on national accounts is pretty critical.
There's a psychographic requirement for that too, and it just hit me because I had the new Southern reps in here. A young man, two young men. One of them used to work at his dad's liquor store to get signed on, and then of course they were proud to tell me that they both have WSET 2 or 1 or whatever they got, but that's now kind of a minimal requirement just to be in our industry. But I stopped them. I said, I don't really care about your WSET unless you care, unless you really care about what you're selling, and you want to tell the stories to your buyers, and you want to maximize the value of your skill sets to your buyers. That's your job, is to match their needs with what you have to sell or create the need themselves. So don't tell me about your credential, because you should have earned it on your own anyway. You should have studied on your own if you're going to be in this industry. And the reason I'm saying that is, if you've got a whole sales force of Southern reps whose job only is to maximize their gates, every gate that they have to get, units gates, or if it's sales volume, or if it's sell 20 cases of a wine, that motivation gets prioritized over what your supplier rep, what the person that works for Vintage might bring to the table to tell the story. Because they're just out there stirring the pot trying to get numbers. And I think that it's important to have the storyteller come in behind them or with them and say, this is who Vintage is. This is why we do what we do. This is, this is Tracey's strategies and what she, where we're headed with this company, and you should do business with us because of that. And I don't think a distributor rep can tell those stories typically.
I mean, I think, having been a distributor rep, having run a distributor, I can say that, no, you can't tell every story, but there are certain brands and certain stories that resonate with certain reps. And naturally or forced, they become advocates for that brand.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I see that too within the scope of our own sales team at BWE, is that there are some people in our sales team that are massive champions of Firesteed. There are certain people in our organization that are massive champions of Kunti vineyards. And so for us and for my brand managers, it's a matter of teasing those people out and leveraging them as ambassadors across the whole organization to talk about success stories, to talk about how to effectively sell. And so for us, it's like a great 360 of creating this 360 net of communication around, here's the marketing message, here's how it's translating in sales, and vice versa. And you're certainly going to see that on the southern side. You're going to see that on the R&DC side, regardless of how high or low someone is in the sales organization. There's going to be certain brands that they love and certain supplier representatives that they love. And so they're always going to have a conversation around that supplier or that brand because they love them, whether they love the personality or they just freaking love the quality of what they're selling. But again, you're right. There's a certain level to which that will be usurped by business demands and saying, we need to respond to Wagner, or we need to respond to Frank Family, or, whatever's driving the bus from a profit point of view.
It's an interesting thought. I just thought of this. It's kind of like a customer who calls me on vacation or sends me a picture of a bottle of wine that they're drinking in front of the Colosseum in Italy, and they say, "Can you get this for me?" And then they get it. I get it for them, and it doesn't taste the same. And I'm wondering if the reps have that same sort of, somewhere along the line, the experience of a brand, a particular brand, a conversation with the supplier, maybe a visit to the winery, maybe a dinner they had with their girlfriend or boyfriend or wife or sister or brother, that the wine got served and they had an incredible time as one of their brands, that this experience creates this love affair with this, what they prefer to take out of their bag first when they walk into an account.
Sensory experiences in general, olfactory experiences and memory are critical to our business, right? Whether you're a sales rep or whether you're a consumer, is, your ability to recall when I had this wine first, or when the aromas in this wine remind me of whatever, my grandmother's garden, or those experiences are very, very unique to wine, because we're leveraging all of your senses. And so I think that is something that's unique about our category in general, and something that we can continue to, play through from a marketing point of view.
Lunch. No, it wasn't lunch. It was just a tasting. But I was with the Cheval Blanc.
Nice.
Yeah. Those kinds of invitations I jump on right away.
Yeah, I would too. Next time, bring me.
I'm happy to. It was here in LA. There was the CFO, and we were tasting through about, 6 or 7 vintages. But the question I asked him, because, Bordeaux is so expressive of its terroir, not quite as much as Burgundy, but it's certainly, they have, and Cheval Blanc in particular has this cross section of terroir to deal with, at least on the soil part. And I said, how do you, with a wine that's somewhere around $1,000 a bottle wholesale, what happens in the boardroom when you're discussing the idea between presenting to the public a Cheval Blanc blend? Boy, would I just say that? Cheval Blanc brand versus trying to express that vintage in the terroir from that vintage, and the sun or the cold or whatever happened during that vintage that we want to express in that bottle. So what's the Vintage Wine Estates approach to sort of balancing this act between brand recognition so that the person opens that wine, they go, oh yeah, this is so-and-so, versus I'm really trying to make sure that our winemakers express what they're being given from the field?
Well, gosh, I mean, I don't know that you can really compare like a Cheval Blanc or
Well,
a
I suppose.
It's, I mean, for second growth, it's, the lore of those brands has been around for over a century, right? So when we look at our own brands, I think it's the experience of the brand in its totality. So using Clos Pegase, for example, or Gerard, or Cundy, the consumer has exposure to the brands through wholesale at Safeway or through our wine club or through e-com or whatever channel that they're experiencing the brand. The key is to make sure that their experience with the brand is the right one. So the wine has to be on point. It has to be good value for money. It has to be reflective of a value or a level of provenance that is reflected in the wine itself. And so I think that with a Cheval Blanc, they have this built-in provenance. They are iconic. And there's certain brands within Napa specifically, I think, that have really become that sort of culty wine. Now, does that mean that it's necessarily worth $1,000 a bottle or $2,000 a bottle? Well, things are only worth what consumers are willing to pay for them. So scarcity, certainly plays into that. We only have 5 cases of this, and therefore, but it's a willingness of consumers. It's a willingness of consumers to buy into the origin story and buy into the unique characters of the wine, whether that's derived from the winemaker, the terroir, that I think ultimately determine its value. Well,
that's the number one question that we all get eventually, right? Really worth it? Like, this is Opus worth $500 a bottle, and I can get a good bottle of wine from Napa for $100. And so my answer,
get a good bottle of wine from Napa for $20.
Yeah, right. You can. And so the question is the multiple? Let's just go from 100 to 500. Is that wine 5 times better? Of course not. Of 2 properly made wines from Napa, even the $20 ones. It's not about that. It's about the fact you pulled out an Opus that cost $500 and you poured it for somebody, and that's just the experience. And everybody gets to say, I had it. I just got a text yesterday from Singapore from one of my friends who's a real estate agent, a real estate developer, and he couldn't believe what they were pouring at this sort of conference of developers that were looking for Asian investment. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, it was every top growth you could ever think of.
But was it authentic? Because they have a huge counterfeit problem in Asia.
That is a great question. You want to know why? That's a great question. Guess who was there having dinner with these guys?
Who?
Rudy, the famed counterfeiter.
Really?
Yes. And is that a crazy story? And so he landed yesterday. The guy called me today. He goes, I got to tell you this story. We had dinner with Rudy. I'm like, but the wine came from the restaurant. So they feel like maybe it was legit. He said something fun about Clos Pegase. I don't know if I told you the story before, but I have friends who are now learning wine, and they're understanding that you always seem to start with Napa when you're doing that. Napa and Bordeaux is sort of the starting points for learning about wine if you're in California. And we were at Clos Pegase, and there were 2 cabs out. They were both I think one was a vineyard designated, the other one wasn't. And we were talking, and he says, I think it's bullshit what you guys say about wine. I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, when you say it tastes like leather and cedar and all this stuff. I go, well, let me just turn around, Al. I said, taste these 2 wines. You have 2 Cabernets. They're both 2014s. Do they taste different? He said, yes, they taste different. I said, okay, you just started on your way. You just can't describe the differences yet, but one day you will, and you'll be going, I guess Paul was right on this one. So, but it's interesting. That's a great brand. I love the brand. Can you tell me where you think this? I brought it up with Rupert Symington, as I discussed earlier. Do you have a lock on, or do you have a attempted opinion of what 2024 is going to do with us in this consumer world? I don't want to throw in the fact that we've got the White Claws of the world. We've got these new non-alcoholic drinks, which I don't understand at all. We have canned wines, which I know that, in fact, Pat and I talked about a canned wine he had from, like, I don't know, some Burgundy from way back. We have Tetra Paks. And it kind of disturbs me that packaging is becoming the leading decision-making factor on buying a bottle of wine or a can of wine. I suppose there are episodes where it's important, but can you tell me what you think 2024 is going to bring to this industry?
I mean, I think sustainability will continue to be a big driver. So companies like ours that are sustainable across the board, whether it's we're sustainable in the vineyard, we're sustainable in the winery, we're sustainable in our offices, I think matters, right? And it certainly matters to a younger consumer. I think sustainability is the key. I mean, regardless of all the different packaging pieces that we're seeing, whether it's can or Tetra or bag and box, I mean, I think something like 97% of all wine is still purchased in bottle. And so what we're doing as a company in addressing that fact is like, look, we know that the consumer really wants the ritual of opening in a bottle of wine and pouring it, or, having it on the shelf like you do behind you, or, but how do we then address the sustainability issue and the weight? And so we've moved into all lightweight. We're moving now into all lightweight glass molds. So we're cutting the weight of our glass by 33%, which cuts the cost of shipping down, and which cuts, our carbon footprint down. And I don't think we're certainly not unique to that movement. You're going to see most wineries moving toward that.
What's the strength like on those bottles? Are they doing something to the glass to make them stronger? We're going to have more breakage?
No, I mean, they're extremely fortified and they've been tested. Obviously we wouldn't risk it if they weren't. But if there's been wines that I've actually created that the bottle weighs, before we even put wine into it, the bottle itself weighs more than a pound. So there's a lot of that. And I don't think that's going to go away in its totality, but I think big companies like ours and the Wine Group and Constellation are really moving toward how do we create less of a footprint. We recognize that we create a footprint in our use of water and our use of glass, but how do we create less of a footprint?
I think of all the industries, sustainability is natural for the wine business. And the conversation I had the other day with a Cornell professor who was working on a food grade lining extension, the life extension of the food grade lining that goes in cans. That's his job. And so he's actually made the comment, yeah, that cans are like, job security for me because I really like them. But he also commented how the glass, the carbon footprint of glass is very large and cans are not. And so it's sort of pondering the idea of, is that the reason? Do we give up the benefit of a bottle and all the things that go with the romance? Not that itself is a good reason, but when we're trying to find something to extend the canned life to 24 months, doesn't that sound kind of disgusting that like whatever we're putting on the inside of the can can't handle that? It's interesting because Coca-Cola, 7-Up, sparkling sodas don't erode the food grade lining like wine does, I guess, based on the pH, et cetera.
Right.
But he looks at it as job security, but I look at it as like, I don't know if I'm prepared for that personally. We all know that most wine's drunk from the first, hours. What do they say now? Like 2 hours once they buy it, something like that. But
hours wine that's within purchase.
I wrestle with that problem, but and I kind of was leaning towards too with the volume of wine that, it seems to me it's two different, maybe more than two different segments. Because I hear this guy sends me pictures from Singapore of Chateau Briand and things like that, and then no one can afford that, so we're in the markets and we see all the brands that we see every day, and we're buying those. And those are necessary for people to have and have access to wine. But I've got this romantic viewpoint of wine that it connects us to the soil, it connects us to the earth, it connects us. It's why we can sit with a bottle of wine and not be intimidated in conversation with our friends. We were in a villa in Tuscany with some old fraternity brothers and our wives, and one of them I've known for many years. We opened a bottle of Brunello Montalcino. Everybody went to bed, and we drank 2 bottles, and we covered every subject in the world, and wine does that, and I've yet to be able to define that reason, except that maybe it does just connect. There's something ethereal about it that connects us to the earth.
Well, I think wine in and of itself, the fact that it comes in a package that's meant to be shared.
That's a good point.
So much of the culture with wine is about food and about communion. And I think at the end of the day, what's really embedded into wine culture, and I see it even just from, living in Napa Valley and the friend group that I have, whether it's people who are also in the industry who are pouring wines that are, our tasting rooms or serving us dinner at our favorite restaurants. Mm-hmm. There's a sense of communion. And wine, I think that's a really, really clear and distinct key brand benefit of wine is the idea of communion, is that it physically is intended to be shared, and it's intended to create an environment of let's talk, let's share a meal, and I mean, that's like toilet paper, Coke and Pepsi, like no one will ever own that occasion. Yeah. And I mean, if you look back to the way that Coke, for example, was marketed in the 50s and 40s, it was all about family. It was creating it that Coke was a part of the fabric of American life and part of your meals and part of your celebration.
True. Good point.
And wine naturally does that, right? Wine naturally is part of that. And once consumers get over the intimidation factor, I don't know what variety get. I don't know, what the difference is between a Carneros Pinot Noir and a Russian River Pinot Noir. Once you get rid of that and just drink wine and figure out what you like, then that even creates a deeper level of communion.
It's an interesting thought. There was that story about when Coca-Cola was teaching the world to sing, like what happens to your lifestyle when you have Coke. At the same time, Pepsi,
by the way.
What's that?
I think that was Pepsi. I might be wrong.
No, it's the other way around. Pepsi was doing the taste-off with the piece of wood in front of the 2 cans. And then, so they were doing like, who tastes better, but Coca-Cola said,
want to buy the world a Coke.
Right.
Oh, got it.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
So they're showing you a lifestyle
we're showing our age here, Paul. We are showing our age.
Yeah, I know. Well, what are you going to do? But it's an interesting thought because it's exactly the same thing as what you're saying. Well, we're already on an hour, and so this is amazing because it's always so great to talk to you. And we're coming up in December, waiting on a couple of pieces of information. We'll be hanging out in Yountville for a little bit and doing some podcasting. I'd love to share a glass of wine with you when we can.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that.
If you're in town, more to talk about. I still have some notes here that I didn't get a chance to even get to the subjects, but this runs on radio station in Atlanta as well, so I have to keep it under an hour to accommodate all the other things.
Understood.
Such a pleasure to see you and say hi to the family, and I hope we get to meet them too.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul. Let me know when do you know when you're going to be in Napa?
We believe it's the first week of December. I'm waiting for one piece of news I'll get tonight about my daughter needing us for babysitting. That's what our life's about. And wait till you get there.
Yeah, we're good there. My wife can't wait. I'm like, no. Let's just enjoy being empty nesters first, and then we'll get to that.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. It doesn't really happen. You once you're the parent, you're always the parent, and this is the end of the story. So I complain, but I love it too.
I do. I get it.
Cheers and good to see you.
Good to see you. Stay well.